Good morning, guys. This week you're going to wrap up the class by completing a soil texture lab. So you're going to learn a little bit about soils and do a quick activity to see what texture of soil you have somewhere from your yard. Okay, so the first thing I want you to know is that there is a lab template document that looks like this. Okay, so I've put in some of the background information. You need to fill in your name, background study here. The part in italics you can erase. And then I just gave you some ideas of what to write about. You're going to create a bulleted list of materials and you're going to write your own procedure. There's a handout that kind of walks you through this lab. You can summarize their procedure that they have there. Okay, once you've done that and you've went through all the steps of the lab, you're going to record your observations here and you're going to determine what class of soil you have using the soil textural triangle. Okay, so I'm going to flip here to this. Sorry, it's a little bit off from the other document. But you're going to do a jar test to figure out what kind of soil you have. So there's some background information here, and it tells you what materials you needed. You're going to need a glass jar, something that's clear so that you can see through it, and hopefully it has a tight fitting lid or like the top of the jar. If you can't find a glass jar, be creative, find an old glass that maybe your mom or dad doesn't care about you using anymore because you're going to get this full of mud. Okay, so here's your procedure. It says to work in pairs. Obviously, you're going to do this on your own, but you need to get a soil sample from somewhere. It could be a field near your house, it could be a garden, it could be, whatever you can find. You need to fill the jar 1/4 to a third full of soil. Okay, so you're just going to put a fourth or a third jar full of soil inside the jar. Then you're going to add water until the jar is about 3/4 full. You want to leave some room at the top so that you can shake this up and perform the lab. The next step is to add a teaspoon of dishwash detergent. It says powdered. It's going to work okay if it's just your regular dish soap, like liquid dish soap. That's going to be fine too. So just put a teaspoon or a small amount of that in there. You're going to put the lid on the jar, and it says to shake it for 10 to 15 minutes. I don't think you're going to have to shake it that long. When we do this in class, usually, if you put the lid on and you shake it for a minute or so, that mixes everything up. So what you really want to do is break up all the little chunks, mix it in with the water completely. So it's just going to look like a jar full of um, liquid mud when you get to the end. Then you're going to put the jar somewhere where it will not be disturbed. The lab here says 2 to 3 days. If you leave it sit overnight, that's going to be plenty of time. Okay, what you're going to see is that the different layers of soil are going to settle out in the jar. The heaviest particles are sand, so those particles are going to settle out first and be at the bottom of the jar. The medium-sized particles, the layer in the middle, are going to be the silt, and then the layer at the top is going to be clay. One thing that I want you to keep in mind is that not every soil has sand, silt, and clay in it, so you might only see 2 layers. You might see 3. They might be very different sizes. You're just going to have to look carefully and make your best judgment call. The sand particles are going to be very large. You're going to be able to see the individual particles, so that layer should be easy to see if you have it. Then you're going to measure each layer. So take a ruler or a tape measure, ideally a ruler, and you're going to measure the total height of the soil part, not the water, but just the soil. Actually, let me go down here. I think I've got a picture that I can show you. So here's an example of a jar. Okay, so you are going to measure this total height of the soil layer. So from the bottom of the jar up here to the top of this layer, you would measure that in centimeters. Centimeters works a little bit better because the measurements are smaller, the increments are smaller. You are not going to measure this water part at the top, okay? So the bottom layer is sand here. You can see what I'm talking about. You can see those individual sand particles. So you'll measure the height of the sand layer. And let me see here. Then you're going to measure the height of the silt layer. You can see that it changes a little bit. And then the last step would be to measure the height of the clay. So you can see a really thin clay layer up here. It's a little bit different color. Okay, so you're going to measure the sand, silt, and clay, and you're going to measure the um, total height of the soil. So let's say that this total height is 4 centimeters. Okay, we know it's way more than that, but I'm just going to use that for easy math. Okay, and let's say the sand layer is 2 centimeters. So you're going to follow the instructions in the lab template that I gave you, but you would take 2 divided by 4, and so that would be 50%. Okay, let's say that this layer here is 1.5. Oh, that's not even, that doesn't make sense, but anyway, we'll go with it. You take 1.5 divided by 4 times 100, and then half times half divided by 4 times 100. You'll get the percentage of each layer of soil. Okay, then you use the soil textural triangle, and you find the percent sand, silt, and clay, and you figure out what kind of soil you have. Okay, so you should have practiced doing that already because I went through a lecture with that and I gave you some practice problems. You do not have to do the practice problems that are listed in this lab right here. You don't have to worry about that, okay? Because the answers are on the next page. So if you want to practice, you can, but that's not something that I'm going to have you do. Good luck with the lab and let me know if you have any questions.